One way I felt relieved, one way I felt that, let him out. We'll take care of it.
Nestled on the coast of Rhode Island, Peacedale is a small picturesque community within South Kingstown, known for its classic New England charm and close-knit residents. It was originally established in the 18th century, before gaining prominence in the 19th century as a mill town. As the textile industry declined in the 20th century, Peacedale began to transition away from its industrial roots, yet it retained a strong sense of community. Many of its buildings were repurposed, becoming art studios, community centres, and small businesses that kept the spirit of the village alive. With its historic buildings, tree-lined streets and friendly spirit, the town has long been a place where neighbours know each other by name. Just off the main road, Schaefer Street cuts through a working-class neighbourhood that sits at the heart of the town. Modest homes with narrow porches line the streets, each one proudly maintained by families who call it home. But one day in May of 1975, the tranquility of Schaefer Street was shattered. A young boy had vanished without a trace while playing outside with his brother and friends. Little did anybody know, but the truth was far closer to home than they could have imagined. On the morning of the 18th of May 1975, 5-year-old Jason Foreman was one of the first to wake in the quiet wood-panelled home on Schaefer Street in Peacedale, South Kingstown, Rhode Island. He reached for his favourite outfit, a blue pinstriped shirt and maroon pants, the pair with the tiger patch stitched on one knee. He dressed himself quietly, ready to celebrate a special day in the family's home. It was his mother Joyce's 25th birthday, a milestone that the Foreman family had looked forward to for weeks. As the youngest of 3, Jason was doted on by his parents Joyce and John, and his siblings Marie and John Jr. The Foreman one was a very close-knit one, with John fondly saying of his young son, "He was my baby. He was with me all the time. When we'd be out in the yard together, he'd realise I'm not there and come inside crying." John worked hard to provide for his family, working with his father in a furniture store in Wakefield, and even serving as the vice president of the volunteer fire force. Joyce said of her youngest son, "He was such a happy little boy. He loved his food and was always eating." After the family celebrated Joyce's birthday with presents and cake, Jason and his brother asked if they could go and play outside. Joyce told them that they could, as long as they were home in time for dinner. So the boys went outside and started playing with 3 other local boys that lived in the same neighbourhood. Their play took them to a small area of woods where they started throwing rocks at one another over a brief squabble over a fort. Afterwards, the group of boys went to the parking lot of an adjacent housing complex to continue their play. At around 4 p.m. that afternoon, Jason decided he wanted to go home, but the other boys wanted to continue playing. So 5-year-old Jason turned around and headed in the direction of the family's home alone, running off towards the fire station. It was at the base of a hill that led to Schaefer Street, and it should have only taken Jason a couple of minutes to reach it back home. But that afternoon, Jason never made it home. When Jason failed to appear at home that afternoon, his father John drove around the neighbourhood searching for him. Dinner came and went, and by 7 p.m. the town's fire horn sounded for the volunteers. The community of Peacedale rallied in full force when news of Jason's disappearance spread. Friends, neighbours and strangers alike joined the search, with groups combing through familiar and unfamiliar stretches of town, knowing that every hour mattered. Police Captain Ronald Hawksley, who was overseeing the case, acknowledged the growing urgency. He stated, "There are no leads whatsoever, and as time goes on, there's a greater chance of foul play has taken place. With those words, the reality began to sink in. This wasn't just a child who had wandered off. Something darker could be at play. The search began where Jason was last seen, radiating outward to cover every corner of Peacedale. Volunteers and detectives scoured wooded patches that bordered the town, checked ditches, drains and dumpsters, but the densely wooded areas made the progress slow and arduous. Rough terrain, tangled brush and marshy spots hampered the efforts, making it difficult to comb through every inch as thoroughly as they had wanted. Yet despite the physical challenges and rising temperatures, the search continued with grim determination, bolstered by the increasing involvement of law enforcement and the FBI. Days bled into one another with no new clues. Detectives had come to believe that Jason's disappearance was most likely due to an abduction. Though their spirits remained hopeful, Captain Hawksley admitted the grim reality of their suspicions when he said, "We just hope that somebody has this boy and is taking good care of him." Over the weekend, a massive coordinated search was launched, enlisting roughly 2,000 volunteers to canvass the town's 64 square miles. But when the weekend came, only about 700 people turned up, their numbers reinforced by members of the National Guard, Navy and Marines. They braved the sweltering temperatures nearing 90 degrees, with some searchers suffering from dehydration while police helicopters circled above. Specially trained sniffer dogs worked alongside them, their noses to the ground as they searched for Jason or his body. Yet despite the exhaustive search effort, no trace of Jason emerged. Jason's father, John, said to the Boston Globe, "He may be dead, but I'm satisfied he's not dead in this area." After 9 days, the formal search operations were reluctantly suspended. Police Captain Daniel Pasella explained, "We're no better off than we were a week ago when we began the search." Local detectives remained committed, pledging to investigate any fresh tips that came in. Yet the temporary halt in the search was a shattering blow for Jason's parents. Joyce vowed, "My baby's out there. I'm going to find him. I'll never give up hope. I don't think he's lost. Maybe somebody's got him at this point and is holding him. It's just a feeling I've got." But weeks turned into months and the case remained unsolved. In June, detectives shifted their focus, declaring that they now believed that foul play was certainly involved. Captain Hawksley had a main theory, that Jason could still be alive, potentially taken by a child buying ring or by someone desperate for a child of their own. Months continued to trickle past as John and Joyce Foreman held on to hope that their son would return. They were doing their best to keep life steady for their 2 other children. The holiday season loomed heavy with grief, and Christmas felt hollow without their youngest child. Only a week later came Jason's birthday, a quiet and painful reminder of his absence. Despite the weight of her sorrow, Joyce remained steadfast, telling the Star, "I know people think my Jason won't come back, but in my heart, I'm sure he's safe and alive somewhere." She was clinging to the belief that he had been taken by a woman who was desperate for a child, and she admitted that if this were true, she could find it in her heart to forgive the woman. She tearfully added, "But please, please, tell me my son is well." Joyce often thought about Jason's sweet nature and his love of food, wondering if perhaps he had been lured away by a treat, maybe a cookie or a piece of candy. He'd always been friendly with everyone, making it all too easy to imagine him innocently being lured away somewhere. The months dragged on without a trace until September of 1976, when detectives finally had a lead. They announced that they were questioning a person of interest, 28-year-old Wayne Chapman, who had recently been arrested on a sodomy charge and was suspected of assaulting boys across several states. Chapman had confessed to killing Jason, and charges of indecent assault were soon filed against him. Prosecutors considered the possibility of a murder charge, despite having no body, hoping that there might be precedent. Yet after legal hurdles and a lack of sufficient evidence, Chapman was ruled out as a suspect. He was later convicted for the rape of 2 other boys. Once again, the investigation returned to its dead end, leaving detectives grappling with dead-end leads and unanswered questions. Captain Hawksley and his team had exhausted every lead, travelling to California, New Jersey and Montana, only to be met with disappointment each time. Desperate for any glimmer of insight, Captain Hawksley even consulted a psychic, Ellie Semini, who claimed she had sensed Jason's presence near California. A promising lead led the captain to New Jersey, where a boy recently enrolled in kindergarten matched Jason's description, but unfortunately it wasn't him. It was as though the ground had opened up and swallowed Jason whole. By 1981, Captain Hawksley advocated for a computerised national database to centralise missing children's information. He explained, "That's the only way we're going to get going on this." Later that year, the Missing Children's Act was signed into law, allowing parents to ensure their child's details were recorded with the FBI if local law enforcement refused. It was a small victory, but it brought little comfort to the Foremans, who still clung on to the hope that Jason would one day return home. They drove around town with his picture taped to their station wagon, a daily reminder of the son they refused to give up on. Joyce took a job as a school crossing guard, a role that came with its own emotional challenges. Each day she waited patiently, her heart aching at the sight of any child who looked like Jason. She told the Burlington Free Press, "There's never a moment I stop believing Jason will be coming home. That's what I keep in my mind. I expect he'll come wandering in one day." But tragically, in just a year's time, John and Joyce's long-held hope would be shattered by the devastating truth that Jason was never coming home. On the 16th of April 1982, an unmistakable police presence assembled outside a modest home on Schaefer Street, just a short walk from the Foreman residence. The home belonged to Franklin Woodmansee, a reserved man who lived with his son, Michael. Now 23 years old, Michael was known as a reclusive bookworm, who rarely ventured out without a satchel brimming with books. He was passionate about theatre, and had recently taken up a role in the South County Players' production of Mousetrap, with dreams of one day working as a playwright or producer. Michael had been just 16 years old when Jason Foreman vanished. At the time, he was living with his father, mother and grandmother in the same home, just a few doors away from the Foremans. By all accounts, he had been especially close to his mother, a bond that had endured until her death, after which his grandmother had stepped in as a maternal figure. But things at home began to change after Franklin remarried. According to neighbours, this new family dynamic brought tension. One of them said, "None of them ever got along. There was a constant bickering over there. I would say they were not a close family." As Michael's family life grew strained, he withdrew further from those around him, with neighbours observing his increasingly isolated nature. A former teacher described his demeanour in recent years as pathetic, a young man seemingly adrift and with no purpose in life. Throughout high school, Michael had struggled socially, becoming a target for ridicule. He was often mocked for his weight, but he seldom reacted to the taunts. Despite his withdrawn nature, Michael found his niche in the theatre programme at South Kingstown High, where he flourished on stage, especially as he managed to overcome a lisp while performing. His dedication to the local theatre group was unmatched. He would often arrive hours early for rehearsals, quietly waiting on the steps for the others to arrive. One fellow actor said of him, "When someone looks strange, as Michael did, you sometimes assume that he is strange. But then you say, no, that's not fair, and you make space for that person in your life, and you begin to listen to him as you begin to accept him as a human being." Despite finding acceptance within the theatre community, Michael's behaviour had raised eyebrows in the neighbourhood, especially in recent months. Michael Woodmansee's strange behaviour with the neighbourhood children had caught the attention of his neighbours in recent months. He was often seen on his front porch, smoking cigarettes and chatting with the children. One of his neighbours, Carolyn Ellsworth, described him as a loner. She stated, "You never saw him with anybody but the kids in the street. The kids always stopped and talked to him." Another neighbour, John Camey, shared that Michael had recently begun inviting children into the home. John had even seen a young boy smoking in the kitchen with Michael, and his own son mentioned that Michael had offered him a beer. Concerned, John had told his son to never go inside the house. Then on the morning of the 16th of April 1982, their quiet neighbourhood transformed as police cars and detectives descended on the Woodmansee home. The medical examiner, Dr. Arthur Burns, arrived shortly thereafter, prompting speculation among onlookers about what had happened inside. They wondered if something had happened to Michael or his father. But they soon came to learn that it was somebody else who had died inside the home. Michael first came under police scrutiny just the day before, on the 15th of April, following the assault of 14-year-old Dale Sherman, a local boy who had gone missing from his newspaper route that afternoon. Dale's father, Elwood, had grown worried when his son didn't return and set out to search for him, joined by none other than John Foreman, Jason's father. He knew all too well the agony of a missing child. Unbeknownst to them, Dale was fighting for his life nearby. That day, Dale had started his paper route as usual, along Schaefer Street. Upon reaching the Woodmansee house, he found Michael sitting outside, and he was invited inside. Michael had extended this invitation before, but Dale had always declined. This day, however, he accepted. Once inside, Michael offered him liquor, and after a few drinks, Dale lost consciousness. When he came to, he felt a bandana wrapped tightly around his neck, as Michael attempted to choke him. Dale managed to wedge his fingers beneath the bandana and break free before he fled from the home. He ran back home and informed his father, who immediately contacted the police and made his way to the Woodmansee house. When Michael came outside, he punched him in the face. Officer Patrick Strickland was driving past when Franklin flagged him down and complained that his son had just been punched by their neighbour. The officer suggested that both he and Michael go to the police station to talk. Meanwhile, Dale was taken to South County Hospital for treatment of abrasions around his neck. Over at the police station, Michael Woodmansee sat down with detectives. He made no denials that he had attacked Dale that afternoon, but the confession didn't end there. In the interrogation room, detectives exchanged a silent glance, each wondering the same question. Had Michael done this before? The assault on Dale had been vicious and completely random, almost as if Michael had intended on killing him. And with Michael just happening to live on the same street as young Jason Foreman, whose disappearance shook the entire town 7 years ago, their suspicions grew deeper. When they brought up Jason, Michael looked calm. Without hesitation, he admitted that Jason was dead, that he had killed him. Michael explained that he had been home alone that day, watching from his window, when he spotted Jason walking past his house. Michael thought it would be easy to kill Jason, and he was confident that he could get away with it. He told detectives he had only wanted a bit of fun. Michael described luring Jason inside, fabricating a story that he needed help with something. Once Jason stepped over the threshold, Michael locked the front door and led him upstairs to the bedroom. There, in the seclusion of his room, he sexually assaulted the terrified young boy. When he had finished, he took Jason downstairs to the kitchen, where he plunged a kitchen knife straight into his heart. As Jason lay there, still and silent, Michael hovered. He repeatedly checked, almost obsessively, over the next hour to make sure that Jason was truly dead. He then wrapped the boy's small, lifeless form in a plastic bag and carried him to the cellar with the intent of burying him beneath the foundation. But Michael soon discovered that the cellar floor was made of solid concrete. He changed his plan and instead found an old trunk, wrapped the bagged body in a quilt, and stuffed it inside, snapping the trunk. Years passed. Michael claimed that he forgot that Jason's body was even there, at least until 4 or 5 years later, when his father mentioned that he might clean out the cellar. Michael panicked and returned to the trunk, prying it open to find the small, skeletal remains inside. He took the bones to his bedroom, where he carefully coated them in shellac to preserve them. He said that he kept them in a box in his bedroom. And then, within the following 2 years, he disposed of the rest of Jason's remains. At the Woodmansee family's home, detectives and forensic experts convened. They made their way up to Michael's bedroom on the 2nd floor. It looked like the average bedroom of a young man, clothing and books scattered across the floor. But what they found in that bedroom was anything other than ordinary. They meticulously combed through the space until their search brought them upon a small box that was sitting on top of the dresser. Slowly they opened it, only to be confronted with a sight that made them freeze in horror. Inside lay bones. Human bones. Michael had been telling the truth. The box held a child's small jaw, a skull, leg bones, fragments of an arm, and sections of the spine and rib cage. Franklin Woodmansee, Michael's father, later admitted that he had seen the bones before. When he asked Michael about them, his son dismissed his concerns and claimed they were nothing more than props for a school play. But the detectives could see the truth plainly. Every bone was starkly clean, stripped of all traces of flesh. The lack of weathering indicated they had never left the home. They had been meticulously preserved, either with a knife or some kind of tool, and possibly even through a chemical process. There could be no doubt that these were the bones of a small boy, the remains of Jason Foreman. Later, Dr. Arthur Burns, the medical examiner, observed, "They've been somewhere for quite a while, protected." The next day, Michael Woodmansee was charged with the murder of Jason Foreman. After he was arraigned at the police headquarters, he was sent to the State Institute of Mental Health for psychiatric evaluation. The arrest had been a long time coming for not only Jason's family, but also the detectives who worked on the case. Captain Hawksley referred to the case as the toughest of his career, telling the media, "I just couldn't find an answer. I couldn't find a common denominator. But I promised his parents since the week he went missing that I wouldn't quit." The captain had actually planned on retiring a year earlier, but Jason's disappearance prevented him from doing so. The next day, Woodmansee appeared in court to be formally charged with first-degree murder and assault with intent to murder in relation to the assault on Dale. The judge refused to allow bail for the murder charge, but set a $100,000 surety bail on the other charge. Woodmansee's father, Franklin, was sitting in the courtroom alongside Reverend Richard Bowser, the pastor of Wakefield Baptist Church. With his son behind bars and a widow for the second time, Franklin felt truly alone in the world. One unnamed friend commented, "He's been very, very depressed. He's like a lost sheep. Michael was all he had." After a brief court hearing, Woodmansee was returned to the State Institute of Mental Health. He was confined to a high-security section of the hospital and was under constant surveillance as he was evaluated. After a couple of days, Woodmansee's defence attorney, Richard Kasparian, asked the district court to dismiss the murder charge on the ground that family court had jurisdiction in the case because he was just 16 years old when Jason was killed. What complicated the case, however, was that Woodmansee was an adult when he was arrested, not a teenager. The implications were massive, because the maximum penalty that family court could hand out was incarceration until the age of 21. Attorney General Dennis Roberts announced he would be pushing to have Woodmansee tried as an adult. While a decision on that was still being made, it was announced that Woodmansee had been found competent to stand trial. Dr. Ronald Mark Stewart wrote in his report, "This patient has an unimpaired layman's knowledge of the judicial system, giving a clear description of the roles of the judge, jury, defence and prosecuting attorneys, and is capable of assisting." He found that Woodmansee had an above-average intelligence and was alert, coherent, and was in good contact with his surroundings. Furthermore, he found that his memory was unimpaired, and that he didn't appear to be delusional. Woodmansee had denied to the doctor that he was suicidal or homicidal, and he said that he considered himself asexual. However, he said that if it were necessary to classify himself, he would consider himself bisexual. He further said that he never felt like he belonged in any group and always felt like an outsider. Woodmansee subsequently pleaded not guilty to all of the charges against him, while his defence attorney announced that he was going to be launching an insanity defence. Then in October, Woodmansee was finally moved from the Institute of Mental Health to the Adult Correctional Institution. While he had been deemed competent by the doctors who oversaw his care, the move came after Judge Thomas Needham declared him competent. The next month, the judge also announced that Woodmansee would be standing trial in adult court, not family court, like his defence attorney had argued for. The judge made the decision after prosecutor Susan McGurl said that if Woodmansee were transferred to juvenile court, he could slip through the cracks of the justice system. In February, Michael Woodmansee appeared in court and stood alongside his defence attorney. He appeared to be nervous and was repeatedly fidgeting. He then announced that he had changed his plea and was instead pleading guilty. Over the past couple of weeks, a plea bargain had emerged, which saw him plead guilty to second-degree murder rather than face a trial that could see him facing a life sentence. Jason's parents had accepted the plea agreement as they were concerned about the pain that a trial could cause them and their 2 other children. During the court hearing, Prosecutor McGurl said that Jason had become a victim only because he was at the wrong place at the wrong time. She said that anybody who happened to be walking past Woodmansee's house that afternoon would have been killed. She referred to the murder as a cold, calculated murder of a small, defenceless child, and said that Woodmansee's silence for 7 years compounded Jason's family's anguish. Michael Woodmansee was subsequently sentenced to 50 years in prison, with 10 of those suspended. He was also ordered to serve 10 years concurrently for his attack on Dale, which he also pleaded guilty to, but to the lesser charge of assault with a deadly weapon. The judge then ordered that all evidence in the case be sealed. After the sentences were imposed, defence attorney Kasparian asked if Woodmansee could be given protective custody at the Adult Correctional Institution, and Judge Needham said that he would recommend it. The plea agreement meant that Woodmansee could seek parole in as little as 15 years. With the case finally closed and Michael Woodmansee behind bars, Jason's parents, John and Joyce Foreman, reclaimed their son's remains. On the 2nd of March, Peacedale Congregational Church opened its door to friends, family and townspeople who had long held Jason in their hearts. At the front of the church, Jason's small, white casket rested beneath the soft light, while John and Joyce took their seats in the front pew, their faces marked by years of grief and resilience. The service, which was led by Reverend Laurent Washburn, was simple yet heartfelt. He said to the congregation, "I believe that Jason has been cared for by the angels of heaven until at this point, in his growth, he is probably more ready to help us than we him." Among the mourners was Captain Hawksley, who was now retired. He had seen the case through with a relentless dedication. To honour Jason, he served as a pallbearer. When he stepped up to the pulpit, his emotions overwhelmed him, silencing the eulogy he had prepared. In a voice that was breaking with emotion, he looked towards the Foremans and simply said, "John and Joyce, I just know that happiness must come from this, and God will see to it." The service remained brief as the congregation stood in unity for the closing hymn. Overcome with grief, Joyce leant into John, burying her head in his chest as she began to cry. He guided his wife outside into the soft drizzle, and together they walked to Riverside Cemetery, where Jason would finally rest. As the graveside service neared its end, Joyce reached for a handful of yellow roses from atop of Jason's coffin. She shared them with John and their 2 children, who were now teenagers themselves. Jason was laid to rest only a few hundred yards away from his parents' new home on High Street. Reflecting on the public farewell, John explained, "We felt Jason had that coming to him. If he had a chance to grow up, he would have done good deeds." Joyce then poignantly added, "Jason became everybody's." A month after Jason was laid to rest, Woodmansee was transferred out of state to serve his sentence. It was for his own protection. The location was never disclosed, but it was thought to be the prison and psychiatric hospital complex in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. Then in 1992, he was able to apply for parole for the very first time. John announced that he and Joyce wouldn't be attending the parole hearing, but they would send a letter opposing parole. He stated, "It just hurts too much to think about it." A petition opposing parole for Woodmansee was signed by 1,300 North Kingstown residents, and ultimately, his parole was denied. His next shot at parole came 5 years later, and it was evident that the town hadn't forgotten about young Jason. Another petition was shared, and local businesses placed the petition on their counters to sign. It read, "All those opposed to the possible release of this convicted murderer into our neighbourhoods, please sign below." The petitions popped up in all the familiar haunts: the Old Mountain Lanes bowling alley, the River's Edge Cafe, and Damon's Hardware. After the petition made the rounds, Woodmansee dropped his bid for parole. He wrote a letter to the parole board and asked for his hearing to be cancelled. Jason's sister, who had since changed her name to Raven, commented, "I think he kind of got the message. My mother has well over 5,000 signatures sitting on her desk. People don't want him out. He's not welcome in South County." The family vowed that they would do everything in their power to keep Woodmansee behind bars. It would be another 14 years before Woodmansee was in the media once more, and Jason's family would find themselves in the fight of their life. On the 6th of March 2011, it was announced that Michael Woodmansee was going to be released from prison. Because of a prison reward system that shaved 10 days or more, a month off an inmate's sentence for good behaviour, Woodmansee was allowed to be released 12 years early. Susan McGarrell, the former prosecutor, who now served as a Superior Court judge, commented, "Certainly there would not have been any anticipation of him getting out in 28 years. By now, Jason's mother Joyce had sadly passed away. She was just 50 years old when she died from lymphoma in 2000. Woodmansee was being held in Gardner, Massachusetts, but prison officials said they wanted to bring him back to Rhode Island a couple of months before his release. The purpose was to transition him back into society, and this would include a mental health evaluation. After his upcoming release made the news, Jason's father, John, commented, "Over the years, I've blacked out all memories of what happened to Jason Douglas. That was his middle name. The tragic end to his life is too painful to think about. I've been able to visit Jason and his mother Joyce at their gravesite, with only love in my heart for them. But now I'm afraid to visit, now that the terrible memories are back to haunt me and my family. There's no forgiveness in me, only revenge." The next day, John spoke with WPRO-AM and said that if Woodmansee were indeed released, he was going to kill him and do it as aggressively and painfully as he killed his son. He stated, I do intend, if this man is released anywhere in my vicinity, or if I can find him, I do intend to kill this man.
Do intend, if this man is released anywhere in my vicinity, or if I can find him after the fact, I do intend to kill this man. And I just need that other information so I can kill him as aggressively and as painfully as he killed my son.
He spoke about the anguish his son's murder had on him over the years.
It was a terrible, terrible 7 years. My family didn't have a life because of that. I wasn't there for my family. I was trying to find him, and I was trying to get it out of my mind at the same time. And what has happened is all these years after he put away, it was finally I had some relief. I quit drinking, and I got it out of my mind, and now it's all back to hit me again.
For the very first time, more details about Jason's murder were finally revealed. Woodmansee had actually kept a journal in which he gruesomely detailed the murder of Jason. The details of this journal had been sealed by the judge and kept completely out of the public eye. John said that Woodmansee had not only killed his son, but he had dismembered him and then cannibalized his flesh. He stated, "That's what he thinks about. That's what is still on his mind, I'm sure, if he gets out again to do this again." In Peacedale, thousands of people came together to protest the release of Woodmansee. At the forefront of the movement was Jason's sister, Raven, who said, "Michael Woodmansee stole my childhood. He made the boogeyman real. I've grown past anger. I grew past anger once it was decided he was going to prison and that he was going to be there for a very long time." Raven said that she wanted Woodmansee's journal unsealed so that everybody could discover the horrors that he inflicted on her 5-year-old brother all those years ago. They should know what they're dealing with, she said. She said that the murder was sexually motivated and that authorities worried if the journal got into the hands of the wrong people, they would end up with some, quote, Charles Manson type of cult following, unquote. According to Raven, some things in the journal were so horrific that even Stephen King couldn't have come up with them. There were a handful of protests in the upcoming weeks, including one where John reiterated his threat to Woodmansee if he were released. He said that those feelings of revenge were in his head every single day. It was decided that Woodmansee's journal would be unsealed for psychiatrists to examine, and that he would be subject to a commitment hearing. This meant that Woodmansee could potentially be involuntarily committed to a psychiatric hospital if it was believed that he was a danger to himself or to others. While he was being examined, the state Senate passed revisions to a bill that would ban the state's most serious criminals from accumulating time off their sentences for good behaviour. The potential release of Woodmansee had horrified the entire state, and it was decided that something needed to be done to prevent something similar from happening ever again. Attorney General Peter Kilmartin proposed legislation that would prohibit criminals charged with crimes ranging from arson to third-degree sexual assault to murder from accruing good time credits in prison. Then towards the end of May, it was announced that Michael Woodmansee had agreed to voluntarily commit himself to Eleanor Slater Hospital in Cranston, meaning that he was not going to be released to the public after all. 2 psychiatrists who had evaluated him found him to be a candidate for civil commitment and that his unsupervised presence in the community would be harmful to him or others by reason of mental disability. Voluntary commitment didn't mean that Woodmansee could sign himself out at any time, and there was no limit to the civil commitment. Medical professionals would see him every day, and at some point, they or Woodmansee could decide if he was eligible for discharge. But that didn't mean he could simply walk out the door. That decision would be up to a judge. Reid Cosper, state mental health advocate, explained to NBC.
Once you're there, the law provides that you get an individualized treatment plan that's based on your clinical picture and your history and your diagnosis. And people stay at that hospital. You know, we have patients who've been there for 48 years, and we have patients who come and go in 3 months.
John Foreman appeared in a press conference that afternoon and stated, 26 years ago, Michael Woodmansee brutally killed our son, sexually molested him and cannibalized his body. It wasn't until 1982 that we found that the monster lived right across the street. Our family has lived with that nightmare for many years. When we found out that Michael Woodmansee would be released due to the Good Time Behaviour Statute, our nightmare started over. He said that if it wasn't for the media attention and public support, Woodmansee could have been out on the streets again. But still, John felt that Woodmansee got off too easy, adding, "He'll be taken care of for the rest of his life." Jason's brother, John Jr., then added,
One way I felt relieved, one way I felt that, let him out. We'll take care of it.
On the 9th of September 2011, Michael Woodmansee was released from prison and transported to Eleanor Slater Hospital. He remains there to this very day, locked up for his own safety and the safety of others. Well, besties, that is it for this episode of Morbidology. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I'd like to say a massive thank you to my newest supporter up on Patreon, Durwood. Morbidology is just a one-woman team, so the support up on there seriously goes such a long way, and I genuinely am eternally grateful. If you'd like to support the show in another way, please consider leaving me a rating and review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever else you may be listening. Ratings and reviews are a super easy way to support a show that you like, and I genuinely do appreciate the feedback. Remember to check us out at morbidology.com for more information about this episode and to read some true crime articles. Until next time, take care of yourselves, stay safe, and have an amazing week.